in any case, I've got quite a few of these at home I haven't bothered to process yet. Yeah, you were saying something about Tony
So your
Parsons.
non-experience.
The non-experience.
Yeah.
Can there be an experience when
Something
there's
happened
no...
to you.
So, I feel at this point, what I really should say is, you know, I have written an entire book about this, my seeking years, going back to the mid-20s.
Okay,
So really, I think, obviously, you and everybody else should buy that book.
I can do that.
And 2 or 3 copies for your friends, relatives, aunts, uncles, children, etc. So it's all there in 275 rib-tickling pages.
But maybe you could humour me and give me a
Yeah, I
summary.
will, but yeah, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to put a plug in for that.
But I don't know anything about you. It's my first time meeting you.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to read your books.
Okay, so very briefly, well, we don't know if it's going to be very brief, or it's going to take up the whole of the rest of the time. So very briefly, major explosive acid trip in my 20s, which kind of blew apart my conceptions of what this is, the recognition that whatever the hell it is, it's not necessarily what this makes it. There's some interaction going on at that stage. I would have been thinking there's a me living in this, so there's some kind of interaction going on between whatever this is and whatever that is, but it's extremely fluid and not nearly so fixed as I believed up to then. Followed by, I think for many people, I started then after that meditating as a result of personal trauma, which often happens, relationship breakdown, misery, which was unbelievably effectively banished by opium, which was my preferred drug of choice at the time. But I was intelligent enough to realise that although opium is undoubtedly a complete and total solution to every problem that anyone has ever experienced, it does
Creates
apparently...
others.
What?
Creates other problems.
Well, yeah, it does apparently have a dark side. Unfortunately, I was intelligent enough to realise that, fortunately. A few pathetic attempts to get involved with Buddhism and meditate very painfully in my own sitting room, in which my mantra was the constant awareness of pain in my aching spine. Followed by a meeting with somebody who'd done transcendental meditation, who was one of my students, and I had noticed something about him before I knew this, which was that unlike most of my students, he just seemed incredibly calm, very, very well balanced.
You were teaching something, were you?
Yeah, I was teaching English as a foreign language to foreign assistants. So this chap, Swiss assistant, and he just seemed, there was something really kind of calm about him, and I was chatting to him one day after class, and he said it was because of TM. So in despair, I handed over a huge cheque to the TM organisation on a doorstep in Pimlico, went inside thinking this is a complete bloody waste of time, I'm just sort of spending this huge sum of money, obvious, you know, what the hell am I doing, was sat down in this room, given this initiation, and then I just, you know, it was incredibly effective on me. I was just lucky in that way. In a way, like for the first time in my life, I don't know when, I was probably late 20s by then, just thinking stopped. To the, you know, the sort of the realisation that even this has been going on, because it's so constant, you don't notice it, blah, 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 blah. So that led to, you know, 3 years of passionate involvement with transcendental meditation, and then sorry, the reason I'm pausing, but not quite, it's like there was, I mean, okay, speaking from our perspective, there's no person involved in this, there's no will anyway, but from the perspective of the young man at the time, there's a person and there's will and there's choice, whatever, but with none of that apparently taking place, an intense passion arose to go and see a guru that I'd heard about, which was extraordinary because I heard about him on a TM course, and what I heard about him was that he was an incredibly dangerous man and no one must go anywhere near him. And I discovered later the reason for this was because this organisation had just been set up and he was poaching lots of TM teachers, so they hated him. So I went to a talk which turned out to be about him rather than, and I was just completely like that, you know. So I learnt those meditation techniques which were extremely powerful, and he'd come over to England and do residentials which were wonderful. I mean, he was, you know, he was the works, you know, sort of lovely Indian robes and that sort of thing, very exotic, but also very down to earth. He knew what he was doing. So there were a few years of passionately following him about. I became one of his teachers, learned to teach meditation, went out to America to see him, blah, 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 absolutely passionate. I'm devoting the rest of my life to this man. And then guess what? The usual story. Huge amount of scandals suddenly came out about him. I don't want to say too much about this because I'd rather you bought the book, but just the juiciest thing, the thing that
I will
actually...
buy the book.
The thing that actually exposed this, basically, if you don't want to be exposed as a guru, then don't piss off your various girlfriends. That's the thing. Don't, you know. The whiskey doesn't matter. I mean, there wasn't cocaine in his case, but it wouldn't have mattered, you know. But don't piss off your... So I still struggle to believe that this story is true, but I know it is true because I know the people involved, right? So he approached the woman who was kind of like the head administrator, you could say. I mean, she kind of led the organisation along with a guy, right? And he approached her with this proposition, and the proposition was this, right? 2,000 years ago, he had been Jesus and she had been Mary Magdalene. They had had a relationship. And now it was time to rekindle that relationship, right? I mean, a simple
not original.
proposition.
It's not original.
It's not at all original, I know.
Have you used that one?
I know other people have used it.
Yeah. I was talking down in Glastonbury, I was talking to Tim Freak about this, and he said he'd been to a meeting in which there were 3 Mary Magdalenes, or maybe more. Anyway, it turned out that's what was going on here, right? So, you know, she succumbed, and then it turned out there were actually 3 Mary. He tried the same line on 3 women, all of whom had become his lover, all of whom were intimately involved with the hierarchy of the organisation, as if they weren't going to kind of swap them. Of course, eventually they swapped notes, and there was this huge eruption of anger or whatever, and a meeting was called of we teachers, and all this evidence was presented before us of his, not just that, but his many other shenanigans, which he basically covered the field. I mean, my feeling was I could forgive him most things. I could certainly forgive him that, you know, but he covered the field. So he was an alcoholic. The hierarchy was sort of busily smuggling full whiskey bottles in and empty whiskey bottles out of the retreats that he ran. There were at least 3 Mary Magdalenes, there were shenanigans with money, it went, you know, blah, blah, blah. I could have forgiven all of that, I wouldn't have cared about any of that. It's almost like he was trying to cover the field so that he wouldn't make sure he upset absolutely everybody, right? So the thing that got me was there was accusations. He was married. I don't think her children were his children, and there were accusations of violence in that marriage from him. So for me, that was the breaking point. So this is all revealed to us one night in London. We're in a state of total shock. He comes over to England a couple of weeks later to address us all. When I say us all, I mean the teachers. And he doesn't really even try to defend himself. I mean, he wouldn't really, because he's the guru. And so that then left us each with the decision whether to sort of stay or leave, and most of us left. So if I go on at this pace, we'll be here till midnight, so we need to speed up. So then after that, it was kind of freewheeling. Many more years of meditation, not really with a guru. I hung around Muktananda Siddha Yoga, very big movement at the time.
I think I've heard of Siddha Yoga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That also, surprise, exploded in a huge avalanche of accusations, sexual shenanigans, but not till he was dead. So Muktananda got away with it. Secret tunnel to the women's dormitory, that sort of thing. So I sort of hung around a bit, but never really felt any, and could never get involved with anything else again in that way. Tried various forms of Buddhism, but nothing else stuck. So basically just kind of went on meditating, blah, 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 blah. Then got invited to a meeting by this strange guy I'd never heard of called Tony Parsons, who was holding meetings in the house of friends of mine, which is the time where I got invited, went along, packed with people, didn't understand a word he said, wasn't interested, thought he was, quite a nice, amusing guy, but no interest whatsoever. Well, what am I doing here? Oh, I got a nice piece of cake, that's okay. Went home, no intention of ever going back. 2 years later, as one of these synchronicities, whereby within the space of about 4 days, I was invited by 2 completely different people who didn't know each other to another of his meetings. By then he was up in Hampstead. I'm sort of, I'm trying to avoid using the word superstitious, but a different kind of word. But, the sort of frame of mind to take notice of synchronicities, plus the fact that one of these people who was inviting me made it quite clear that after the meeting they'd be going over to the pub in a jolly group of people to sort of drink with and chat to and party with, so who can resist that? Went along, still didn't understand a word of it, but this time for, no reason as anybody, completely hooked by it. I mean, the drinks afterwards might have had something to do with it, but it wasn't the whole thing. And just sort of kept going back after that. No idea what he was talking about. Spent quite a lot of time sitting there feeling quite angry, as a lot of people do. All of these concepts being challenged. I mean, I'd been a passionate seeker by nearly 30 years probably, or more than 30 years by then. It's beyond reason, as in you can't reason it out. As time went by, I asked fewer and fewer questions as I began to realise that it was pointless, that no question would ever be answered satisfactorily. Yeah, that's it really. Then there was a kind of what's sometimes called an instantaneous awakening, which I describe as the seeing of emptiness, but only emptiness, and it's kind of staggering, it's revelatory, it's transformative, and it often leaves the person in despair. Because it seems like the answer to everything, but what's also seen is the impossibility of doing anything to get back to it. It's like it's here, it's gone, bang, and it's recognised that because it had nothing to do with me, there is nothing I can do to get back to it. So, I've offered my groups at various times different mantras, but the original basic fundamental mantra that I recommend you use for 4 years before moving on to the next more advanced mantra is hopeless, helpless and meaningless. So what can be seen in that initial opening is that everything's meaningless, nothing has any meaning. helpless, that me that appears to be here is helpless in terms of getting back to what was momentarily seen, and that therefore it's all hopeless. There's nothing this can do which could give hope, and there's nothing this can do which can help, and it's all meaningless. This is often what happens for many apparent people, and often what happens is that this is then followed by a period of despair, which is what happened here. And then after a sufficient time of that, whatever that means, in this case I think about a year. Again, this is very common, but by no means, it doesn't have to happen like this. There was, all I can call it is like another opening. So the person disappears. So again, it has nothing to do with me, just as it has nothing to do with anyone, where not just the emptiness, but also the fullness is seen. And we've already talked about that before, the fullness being the seeing of unconditional love. That's the fullness. And after that, it's just like, okay, well, that's it, it's over. Whatever happens after that, it's just stuff happening. You may have come across, if you've read other people, listened to other people, including Tony, you may have come across that phrase.
So that was an experience.
It's just stuff happening. This is just stuff happening.
So that was an experience that endured, didn't go.
It's so difficult to unpick this. Firstly, it wasn't an experience because there was no experiencer. And secondly, the intensity of that does not tend to endure. So if you talk about, say, that as a character, and this non-experience for this non-person who is a character, the intensity of that does not tend to endure, but it irrevocably, I'm not going to say changes, it irrevocably transforms what's there. Because it is irrevocably known after that what's there is not what appears to be there. What appears to be there is a person. And what is known to be there after that, we use whatever word we like, I tend to use the word character.
But did you feel different in your body? Did you feel amazing?
So what often happens is that there can be a complete dissolution of any body sense whatsoever. So when, not that anything about this communication is important, but if anything, if a few things are, this will be one of them. When we talk about there's no space, forget about there's no time, which in a way is more obvious, but there's no space, there's no here and there. There's no differentiation between this body and the wall, or whatever. This isn't theoretical, it's not philosophical, it's not philosophy. It's a literal description of what can be seen. So if the, what's the phrase I best use? If this seeing occurs, then it is seen. Sorry, the reason I'm hesitating is because I know seen is such an inadequate word. Any word I can use is so inadequate. It's seen, it's felt, it's known. Use any word we like. Use a combination of all of those, that there is no location. So what seems to be located here isn't located here. What seems to be located here is everywhere. What seems to be over there isn't over there, it's everywhere. And because everything is everywhere, there is no everywhere, because everything is the same. Yeah, so there's no time, there's no space, and it's unconditional love. Yeah.
It felt nice.
And you can hear that story. You can hear that story, because it is a story repeated by many people, and I just love that. The banality of that is wonderful. Yes, it felt nice. Yes, you could say that. Yeah.
Well, it continues to.
That intensity rarely continues, I would say. I would say that intensity rarely continues.
But is it
I would
nice?
think it's probably difficult, I don't know, I mean I'm just speculating here, it's probably difficult to go on living what is in any way a kind of normal life with that intensity. So you see, I don't know, but if I think of somebody like Ramana Maharshi, maybe that intensity was always there, but he was hardly living a normal life. Yeah.
So is it nice on a less intense level?
Oh, again, I love the banality of that. Yeah, let's stick with that. Nice.
Nice.
Love it. Yeah, we'll stick with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Has it been nice?
This is such dangerous ground, this. Can you hear it? How dangerous this ground is in a way.
No,
Hey,
it's helpful.
dangerous, I mean,
I
I
find
don't
it
mean
interesting
that
and
in a...
helpful.
Yeah, but... Yeah.
Has it been nice for the other people in your life?
It depends, I think. This can be catastrophic on an ordinary level. It can be. It depends what the nature of that life was.
Well, I mean, you don't have to tell us if you don't want to, but obviously you've revealed that you have a,
In this
you have a
case,
family.
in this case, no. In this case, it was fine,
That's
and
fine.
I don't mean that in the, the psychotherapeutic sense where
Yeah,
fine
yeah.
means fucking incapable of normal emotion. I mean it was fine. In this case, because of the relationships, the family, blah blah blah. It can be catastrophic. It can involve a breakdown of our most apparently close relationships when we discover those relationships aren't actually that close. It can particularly be catastrophic where what holds the relationship together is a shared, I'm going to call it a mythological story, a shared mythological story, such as, for example, this guru is going to be our salvation and we're devoted to him, and every week we have a little kind of ashram set up in our spare bedroom and we invite people around. And well, you can imagine that if that's what's holding a relationship together and then one of you sees that as ridiculous, as just a story, that can make the relationship fall apart. Yeah. So there's no way of knowing what may happen as a result of this. It can be hugely disruptive in one person's case and not disruptive remotely in another person's case. Yeah.
Do you think fear of disruption might be a reason? Might I suppose obviously things have consequences. I suppose what I'm asking is, to what extent can one be psychologically motivated towards experiencing, let's call this an awakening, or is it something which is purely autonomous?
It's purely autonomous. It comes, again, we're back to Ramana Maharshi saying your head is in the tiger's mouth. It comes out of nowhere for no reason that we can understand. I mean, the mind's usually quite capable of making up a story to explain this, oh, it's because of my, my magnificent golden karma from past lives or whatever it might be, or whatever it might be. But it's beyond understanding. Just as the experience itself is beyond understanding, the peace that passeth understanding.
So do you think it happens to sort of people who are, working as taxi drivers and
Yes.
stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It is without reason. So perhaps I'm a spiritual seeker for 30 years and nothing, and perhaps I've never even heard of spiritual seeking, and I'm a taxi driver who's mostly interested in greyhound racing, and then suddenly I'm driving a taxi up Hampstead Hill and there's no one suddenly driving a taxi, the taxi is simply being driven. Yeah, And there are cases absolutely like that. I've met people and talked to them. No understanding, no interest whatsoever in this, and bang, there's just an awakening. Yeah.
So you,
And I had somebody used to come to my talks for years and years and years, and he doesn't come anymore, maybe because we've moved upstairs, I don't know, he doesn't like the stairs. And one day he was sitting in one of my meetings and he just said, it seems so unfair. And it does to the mind, it seems so unfair. That this seems to have nothing to do with, you know, my devotion, my dedication, my hard work, my many years of service for the Guru, my many, many hours of devoted meditation. It seems so unfair.
Sounds rather like the Augustinian doctrine of grace, though, doesn't it?
Yes, and a lot of people do bring grace into it. And they say, is it grace? And I mean, there's nothing in me that resists that. The only thing is that it does tend to imply some kind of... The problem for me is not that. The problem for me is the next step that the mind often goes to. It doesn't have to go to that. But, yeah, it's a lovely idea in a way. You know, is it grace? Yeah, fine, it's grace. But then what the mind tends to do is grace has to be earned. So it comes back to something that I can do. And I remember in one of the emails that somebody wrote to me years ago about this, they put it like, you know, we make our efforts and then grace answers us. Well, no, wouldn't it, lovely if we could just say that.
do you think it could have something to do with the relaxation you mentioned earlier? You know, with the tiger's mouth, and you just relax and don't have any expectations. You kind of give up trying, so you get so relaxed that maybe that makes it more likely to happen.
So I'm not going to ascribe cause and effect here, but what I will say is, you know, I've noticed by talking to lots and lots of people that it isn't uncommon. What I'm going to describe happens isn't uncommon. There can be an initial awakening, and as I've said, that can often lead to a period of despair. Christians talk about the dark night of the soul. In other traditions there are other phrases for this. This can maybe last a year, or I mean, who knows, or whatever. 40 nights in the wilderness, 40 days and nights in the wilderness. So there can be initial opening, followed by despair because of the recognition of the hopelessness of my case. So I still seem to be here, but there has been the recognition of hopelessness, so despair. And after a period of despair, there is often enough to make it interesting, that final realisation. Now, you know, I'm not going to sit here and ascribe cause and effect, but it's interesting that that happens quite a lot. Yeah.
The initial.
And the other
and
thing
then
that
you mean the initial, then the despair, and then it happens for real?
Yeah. And the other thing I say about despair, I mean, it sounds horrible to the mind or whatever. So the other thing I often say about despair is actually despair. The kind of despair I'm talking about, you could call it existential despair. It's not as bad as it sounds. And it links up with something else that I've already said. The reason despair, I mean, at this point, if this comes up in other talks, I usually refer to that film Clockwise, which you may or may not know, in which John Cleese is desperate to get his hands on, I think it's Jamie Lee Curtis, I'm not sure. And everything goes wrong, as it has to, because it's a kind of comedy and blah, blah, blah. And he's rushing around trying to da-da-da-da-da-da. And at one point, as he is failing in yet another attempt to whatever it is, he turns and he says, it's not the despair, I can stand the despair, it's the hope I can't stand. And there is such a deep truth in that. You know, that hope, we think, oh, well, you know, hope's wonderful, and particularly if we're imbued in kind of, you know, Western philosophies, you know, which, you know, the kind of descendants of Judaic Christianity and so forth. You know, despair is the word, you know, going to be terrible sin and all of that. Hope, you know, you've got to have hope. Well, no, because, you know, hope keeps us driving on. As long as there's hope, there's always something that you can be doing.
And
Why aren't you doing it?
despair is a letting go.
Yes. Why aren't you doing it? Come on, get off your lazy arse, get moving, keep that hope. Despair, in despair there can be a letting go. So in despair there can be relaxation. And relaxation, as I've already said this afternoon, quoting somebody else, a Buddhist, is the key to Buddhahood right here, right now. So, who knows? I'm just noticing what happens in a lot of people's stories, and I just find that interesting, that in a lot of people's stories, there's an initial opening, there's a period of absolute despair, and a kind of giving up. And then there's the recognition that there is no one.
It's interesting, and I was just thinking through the drugs that cause relaxation. Opium would be a key one, wouldn't it? Deep relaxation with opium. But your experience on opium, was it anything like your experience of waking? No.
No. All I can say about opium is it's lovely, but I would treat it with a bit of caution.
Oh yes, I'm not planning to go down that route.
No. And I can't comment about the kind of more modern drugs, like, because I haven't tried. So I don't know.
Though, but
I've
if it causes that depth of relaxation, then you think that if somebody was on opium, they might be open to an awakening experience because of the relaxation.
Well, if it happens, I haven't come across it. That's all I can say.
It's
Yeah.
a different sort of relaxation, I think.
Yeah.
As somebody who has taken a lot of drugs and tried a lot of relaxation techniques, I can tell you they're not the same. They're not the same thing.
Yeah. As to the kind of more modern drugs that you hear people saying, do give I can't use the word experience. An experience of being without a self. I don't know. I can't comment. Yet. Maybe I'll try them one day and then I'll be able to comment, but I haven't yet. Yeah. So then after that, there's just whatever, life goes on.
Go back to despair. That there is thought to be, for some people, a possible spontaneous awakening that comes from deep suffering.
That's what happened with Eckhart Tolle, going back to before tea, absolutely. 2 years, was it 2 years? I can't remember. Intense suicidal despair, followed by a night which really did sound like a desperate dark night of the soul, followed by awakening, yeah. Now we can see what the mind's going to make of that. If I can induce enough suffering in myself, then I will see God. And then you look at the religions and you look at the kind of the masochistic cults, and you can understand where they come from. So Catholics flagellating themselves, Muslims flagellating themselves.
Or even the Buddha did that, didn't he?
He tried
a few
it.
Years.
He tried it.
Yeah.
And what it led him to understand was, no, this ain't the way. Yeah.
Byron Katie as well is another one. She had the intense suffering and a spontaneous awakening.
Right. Yeah. But there are many cases of awakenings where there wasn't intense suffering. Yeah.
There were gradual awakenings as well, aren't there? I understand.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because there are no rules. Yeah. There cannot be any rules about this. Yeah.
And would you say that there are different levels of awakening?
No.
Some people awaken more than others?
No.
Like, is there a partial awakening?
Well, we can tell stories about it and it's meaningless. But we love telling stories about this because if you go on the internet, you will find teachers who will initiate you in 25 levels of enlightenment.
I mean, the person, the guru that you mentioned, would you say that he had genuinely had an enlightenment experience?
My own dearly beloved Guru Raj, I have no idea. I have no idea. Who
the one
can
who was
say?
the alcoholic?
Yeah, who can say? But,
Because if he had, why would he need to be an alcoholic?
well, who says he needs to be? And, you know...
Or why would he choose to be?
You know, but then there's an assumption. See, this is... But, I mean, at the time I had the same kind of response. Now I would say, well, you know, we make these assumptions that someone who, you know, if what we're talking about has been seen, you know, well, you know, why would they need to drink? Why would they want to drink a lot of whiskey? To which the answer is very simply, well, why not? So you've got a case like Wayne Lickerman, who was an alcoholic, and then there was an awakening, and the alcoholism simply dropped. He didn't give up alcohol; it gave him up, as I understand it, anyway.
Yeah.
And then you've got a case like my own dearly beloved Guru Raj. I don't know what state he was in. Well, this isn't a state, so I'm talking very carelessly. But there was certainly something very special about him, and he was an alcoholic. You know, as the Americans say, go figure.
Yeah.
The problem with this is that we can go figure as much as we like. We'll never be able to figure.
I spent 8 years around a woman who had had some kind of experience, and she had, when she was in states of meditation, her energy field would feel amazing to be around. But I'm sure there was still ego there, and painful, difficult, dysfunctional things would happen. And eventually I stopped being around her.
But what do you mean by ego was still there?
A person.
Do you be a bit more specific or not?
She would have very personal reactions to people. She was quite narcissistic.
Yeah.
She would make neurotic
She would
demands.
punish people. Pardon?
She was neurotic.
She would punish people.
Yeah.
In a very, the group dynamics around her was very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
It's like a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
I mean, this is very common. This is commonplace, obviously, among people, spiritual people, people who can be observed to have, you know,
Yeah.
very positive energies, can also have this very
It's
negative
like a
aspect
dark
to them.
side.
Dark
It's like
side,
a
exactly,
shadow.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention, I mean, it's very, very, very common. I was just going to imagine Andrew Cohen. I was just going to mention Andrew Cohen, for example. Or, yes, it can get very, very dark indeed. I mean, Bubba Free John, there's another one, you know, where it got very, very dark indeed. Yeah, absolutely, can do, yeah.
But I wonder if we're just trying to impose some framework of goodness and badness and good and evil,
Yeah.
and God and the devil.
We can't help it.
And it's
Yeah.
just, it's not right. We're kind of we're missing what's actually going on when we do that.
Yeah.
Well, I was left with a feeling that something's not right here,
Yeah.
and I have to get away from this.
Yeah.
But when it's truly seen at a very deep level, that everything is you, I mean, how...
No, it's not that everything is you.
But at
What's
least
seen at a very deep level is there is no you.
You as in not the manifested you,
Okay.
okay, the unknowable, right?
Yes,
Okay,
unknowable.
unknowable. So then, how, you know, it would be very difficult to treat another badly, if that makes sense.
There's a character. As long as physical death has not occurred, there will always be a character.
But the character will deeply know that this is just a manifestation. Characters are characters. When it's seen very deeply, you cannot harm another, an apparent another. That makes sense or not?
It makes sense.
You could murder them and you wouldn't be harming them.
You couldn't murder them.
I'm going to
Kill
make...
them then. Kill their body. Do their body in.
No, I'm saying if it's seen that everything is that unknowable, okay, the source is the same. It's a better way of putting it.
I'm going to make no comments on that apart from two things pop into mind. One is it's unknowable, and the other thing that pops into my mind, and I mean, I am not somebody who should be talking about Hindu or yogic mythology or philosophy because I don't know very much about it, but we all do know, or many of us know about Arjuna and
No,
Krishna.
we're not talking about killing. That's
Killing,
really
but that's
different.
about killing. That's about going into battle and killing, not just killing, but killing your cousins with the recognition that it is not you who is acting.
I think that
Actions there are, but no doer thereof.
Yeah, that is, I think,
I mean, I make no
consciousness
comment
cannot
on
be
that.
destroyed. The unknowable cannot be destroyed, right?
Say that again.
The unknowable, or whatever you call it, cannot be destroyed. It's that the sword cannot cut it, water cannot wet it, fire
Okay.
cannot burn it. I think that is Arjuna's story.
Okay.
Okay. Or maybe it's just a character then, as you said, you know, a character who's cannot harm another. If it's truly seen that really the source is the same.
So how do we... I don't want to go down too far down this route.
Everything else is
Partly because it may not get anywhere, but mostly because I don't want to too much expose my huge ignorance of this mythology that I'm talking about. But I think there might be, there is something in there very challenging, very, very challenging if you think the kind of, the Western worldview, that you have Arjuna saying, no, go and kill your cousins. Go and kill your cousins, because it's not, it's
Isn't
not
that just a
you
teaching?
doing it.
Yes, but he's at the very deep level, I think I'm talking in two different ways. At the very deep level, you cannot destroy what you are, you as in pointing to that which is unknowable, not this body mind.
No.
Right. There is a difference. But
Yeah.
you find that the Hindu teachings say you. A lot of people can get, that can be misunderstood as you, this body mind.
Yeah,
Okay?
but-
they're talking about something a lot deeper.
Yeah, but when it comes to destroying the body of your cousins who happen to be in an army confronting you, then go ahead and do it. I think I'm going to stop on this. You say anything more you like about this, but I think I'm going to stop there because I'm digging myself a pit here, and it's called the pit of
This is all the
ignorance of
story.
ignorance
so it's okay
of
to discuss
yogic
it, to have
philosophy.
differing views.
But-
That's what it is.
But there is some. I mean, it's getting a little bit kind of esoteric now. But there is something very deep in here about conventional moral responses.
No, it's not a comment on morality, or I don't know whether that's the word. That's no, because bad things happen.
Yeah,
Can't deny it.
yeah.
Maybe I'm not expressing that. It doesn't matter.
I don't know whether this. I mean, I've just linked this up because it just popped into my head, but I don't know whether it kind of particularly whether it's a sensible link. The distance that this can create, there's no doubt about this, that this scene can create a distance with our friends, our loved ones. It doesn't have to, but it can do, it may do. And it may do in all sorts of ways. I've already mentioned the kind of obvious one. If we're both, if me and my partner, for example, are running meetings for our Holy Guru every week or month or so, and I completely lose interest in that, that is likely to create a difference or whatever. But I think one of the differences is there can come about an irrevocable change in attitudes to conventional morality. I mean, they can. I mean, it's I was going to say you can't shy away from that. Of course you can. You can shy away from it, as much as we like. But nevertheless, that can be the case. When it's seen that there's no... Okay, so going back to, Arjuna, blah, 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 we're saying, there is no one who does anything. Things are done. Back to the Buddha, actions there are, but no doer thereof. Right? In terms which maybe the Western mind relates to a bit more and finds very challenging, just the idea of free will. This is a total challenge to free will and choice.
There is no free will.
There is no free will. It's not even that, of course. It's much deeper than that. There is no one who could exercise free will. But, that's kind of too deep for most coffee table conversations you're going to have, or conversations you're going to have in a pub. But there is no free will. You want to start an argument in a pub, or almost anybody you know, try that one. It's a very good way of starting an argument. There is no free will. It's so challenging.
It is. Yeah.
It's so challenging. Now, I'm not going to go into all this neuroscience and the philosophical arguments and all of that, which, pile upon pile, evidence from books we could adduce to show that there's no possibility of free will. Just let's just stick with what we're here to talk about. That seeing this reveals that there's no free will, but there is no one who could possess free will, which is much, much deeper and more troubling in a way.
Some would say it's
This is
just
such
colours
this is such a challenge to just everyday conventional morality which comes up over and over and over again. If I can, it's nearly time. So if I can, do something absolutely forbidden in a talk like this, which is make a remark which is personal in the sense that it comes from this character about this character's life or whatever. I mean, I was in this situation a few days ago, pretending that time exists, whatever. And it's one that I find myself in rather frequently with sort of a few different groups of people I know who are extremely concerned, really passionately, deeply, heartfeltly concerned about stuff that's going on in the apparent world. And the conversation that sort of erupted out of nowhere suddenly a few days ago was about, the planet, green issues. We're all going to hell in a handcart, as it were, the ecological issues, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly, it was a very small group of people, there were about 4 or 5 people, and suddenly everybody else was suddenly bonding very closely, very emotionally, with this kind of passionately, deeply felt concern about the planet burning, let's say. And here, there is there a film called A Failure to Engage or something like that? I don't know. But the sort of failure to engage, that this seems so much like a kind of just a playing out of a personal drama in terms of the intent. I'm not completely devoid of heart, believe me. I mean, I may come across as that. But
what's the name of that film where the asteroids are coming towards the Earth and the governments are failing to act? Do you know what I mean? It's really good. It might be that. I can't remember what it's called though.
There's something about that kind of... I'm really struggling to put... I'm finding this frustrating because I feel like I know what I want to say. I'm really struggling to find the words. There's something about that kind of... There was something about this passionate concern which seemed... I just say the words that are coming into my head, although I can't justify them, which seemed hysterical and fake. It's like, the response of this is the sort of response that we know we're supposed to make. But I recognise that, when whatever it is that we're talking about here is gone, because we're not talking about something arriving, we're not talking, as Tony himself has said many a time, we're not talking about a gain, we're talking about a loss. This is not a gain of anything, it's a loss. It's the loss of the sense that there ever was a person who could awaken. And then there's something becomes apparent about, I'm going to call it, normal human communication between people who believe that they are people. Does that make sense, that phrase? People who believe that they are people. And it's about maybe something about then seeing it as a play and therefore not being able to really take it seriously.
Or maybe it's not being scared of death. So, you know, like there's more than the physical. If you really know there's more than the physical, you're not going to get too worked up about physical life.
I don't know. I don't know. It's something about the drama, seeing that being played out in a melodramatic way. I think, you know.
Well, people project, don't they? They put their angst that's about a lifetime of other things that they haven't resolved.
Yes.
Into
Yeah.
current issues.
Yeah, very much so. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's recognising that what's being expressed is actually a kind of trauma about something which is not about that. Yeah.
It's like when paedophiles go to prison, they get seriously beaten up by all the prisoners who've been sexually abused.
Yeah.
Can I ask whether it was Osho who was your guru?
No!
No.
No! I was kind of guru. There were a few gurus around at the time. This is a very innocent time, a long time ago. There weren't that many. We didn't have the internet. There weren't that many gurus. So there was Osho, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, as we knew him then. Back then. There was Osho. There was Muktananda, who was the Siddha Yoga. They were both big. There were a few others, Sri Chinmoy, for example. There were a handful of them.
I like Chimayananda's.
The running guru.
No, was that
Sri Chinmoy, he did,
He was Ramana Maharishi's direct disciple.
Was he? Yeah.
Yeah.
He ran, didn't he? And
Did he? Oh.
Yeah, he did a lot of running. His devotees, I think, had to run with him. No, he was called, my guru was called Guru Rajananda Yogi.
I've never heard of him.
Well, go and internet him.
Yeah.
Oh, I know someone who had him as her Iris Sparks. Did you know Iris Sparks?
You're kidding me? No, how long ago was that then?
She died just a couple of years ago.
But how long was it when he was actually still alive?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Well, it was a reason. Was she English?
Yes.
It's reasonably likely that I might have known her then, because it was a fairly small movement.
Yes. And she taught a style of yoga where you looked at his photo and you meditated at sunrise and sunsets and in a mantra.
Yeah, he had wonderful techniques.
Really?
Yeah, mantra techniques and Tratak candle technique.
Yeah, the
really
candle.
powerful techniques.
Candle in the morning. Morning?
Well, as long as
I think it was in the morning, wasn't it, for focus and...
He did have amazing techniques,
Yeah, you probably knew her. She would have been about 40 at the time when she was first around him.
Right, God.
And she died at 90 something.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. He died young. He died not all that long after the whole thing broke up. One of the stories he told, he tells these fascinating stories, and one of the stories, he had open heart surgery. He claimed he had open heart surgery with Dr. Christian Barnard, who was the pioneer of heart surgery, and he claimed that, of course, he remained not conscious but super conscious throughout the entire operation, and amazed the surgeons afterwards by telling them what they'd been talking about.
That's a near-death experience.
It could, in a way. Yeah.
He didn't have anaesthesia then?
Oh yeah, he had, absolutely. They didn't open heart surgery without anaesthesia, believe me. But he was so spiritually advanced that he could still blah 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 blah.
My dad had one of
But
those.
the point I was going to make is that then only about 2 or 3 years after, this scandal erupted and the whole organisation collapsed, he did die of a heart attack. So
There was a scandal, was there? It was the scandal you
No,
were
the
talking
scandal I
about.
was talking about.
Oh,
Yeah.
about the
All the Mary
Marys.
Magdalenes and the wife the
Shame I
wife
can't ask
beating.
Iris about that now.
No, you can't unless you go to a medium. Yeah, we'll have to arrange a séance and then you
Yeah.
can ask her.
Yeah. But my dad had a serious operation when he was about 40. He's not alive anymore. But there was a couple of minutes when he was clinically dead in like the post-operative room, and they were all around and reviving him, and he was on the ceiling looking down. It's like, oh, what's going on? What are these people doing? And then he started to walk on the corridor and everything.
Oh, there are
Sent
masses of
back.
these stories,
Yeah.
masses of these experiences.
But he was very calm afterwards about the whole concept of death. It didn't.
Yeah. Yes, those experiences do tend to transform people's attitudes to death. They don't necessarily transform in other ways, but their attitude to death does tend to transform. Yeah.
Do you know
I think
Peter,
the one certain thing we can say about death is it's unknowable.
Yeah, Peter Panagor in America, it's a Greek name. He talks about, in recent times, he's been talking about his near-death experience in his early 20s. He's in his 60s now. He didn't talk about it for most of his life. But he died for a period of time in an ice climbing accident from hypothermia, and had a very, very profound experience. I watched the YouTube near-death experiences. His is my favourite one. It's incredible, and he did come back incredibly transformed, and I just wanted to get back really. He became a Catholic, not Catholic, but he certainly became a man of the church.
Yeah. Oh, there are dozens of these experiences on YouTube, aren't there? Yeah.
But yeah.
I think ultimately, though, I think the mantra, it's unknowable, is quite a good mantra. It's unknowable. And then we can relax, maybe. Yeah. And we're overrunning, I noticed, so thank you for your patience. We've done about 7 minutes over time. So we will stop the formal part of the meeting here, and if anybody wants to come over the road, we'll do that. Press the